President Trump and the First Lady are on the way back after a successful European trip over there. Your coverage over there was very, very favorable, saying he made a very strong speech at Normandy, etc. The time he had with the Queen was well received. But instead, focus here on what he was wearing, whether the First Lady should have been wearing sunglasses, the kind of stuff that normally wouldn't generate much interest or discussion at any time with almost any president. What's going on here? Niall Gardner, former aide to the British Prime Minister Maggie Thatcher, and Axios White House reporter Elena Treen. Elena Treen. Niall, here's what I don't understand. Where the foreign press, normally not very receptive to a Republican president, let alone this one, has nicer things to say about him than the American press.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, Neil. And I've been on the ground here in London all week. And I have to say, I think that not only was this one of the president's best overseas trips, it may well have been his most successful. It's been tremendous, very positive press coverage here for President Trump, even from some of his critics as well. You had some demonstrations far smaller than anticipated, just about 7,000 demonstrators on the streets. But I have to say, the optics of this trip, his meetings with the Queen, the state banquets, his speeches and so on, I think this has been a very, very effective visit. And he also, on the policy front, really pushed forward the idea of a US-UK free trade deal. He hosted a business roundtable at St. James's Palace. And I think that on many policy fronts, this was a very successful trip as well. So I have to say that the White House did a superb job with this trip, coordinating, of course, with Downing Street and with the royal family as well. But I have to say that actually this was a very impressive visit, and the president did very well. He projected statesman-like leadership on the world stage, which I think is exactly the right approach.
You know, Elaine, I'm not here to play politics one way or the other. You know, I can see the good and the bad and all, but I will say, I mean, the fact of the matter was, even networks in this country normally critical of the president said he did a very good job in his speech at Normandy. But no sooner had they gotten that out there than they started saying, yeah, but he was late for the event because he was doing a Fox interview, or just a couple of days ago they were focused on his tux. So rather than what he said at that event, a unique honor given an American president. And I just found myself saying, all right, that balance of import just is not there. But that's just me. What do you think?
Well, I think that I will say, if the worst criticism that the president is receiving is about an ill-fitting tuxedo, that's kind of a win in the president's book. But I think that, I totally agree with what you both are saying, that, especially by this president's standards, he did, this trip was really, very normal for as state visits go. And I think there was a lot of trepidation beforehand, especially on the UK side, given, Theresa May, the prime minister, was on her way out, and this president was weighing in on who potentially should replace her. There were these massive planned protests that were expected to take place and threatened to overstage the week's events. And then, of course, we have a president who has weighed in the past, sometimes in very controversial ways, on Brexit. And, we saw the exchange between him and the mayor of London. There was, I think, a lot of concern there, but none of that happened. He didn't embarrass the prime minister. He didn't embarrass the Queen or the royal family.
He did zing the mayor of London, which I thought, might have been just right in his mind, because the mayor had been lambooning him. I don't know where this all started, but to me, he's a leader of the free world. He shouldn't punch down.
Right, and I mean, that granted, there were attacks on both sides, from the mayor and from the president. Right. I think where the media, though, did, and justifiably so, be a little bit more critical of the president was that in that idle time when he was back at the hotel and the rest of Europe was sleeping, he was tweeting about Bette Midler being a psycho, or the Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer being a creep, and weighing in on the Mueller report. That's where we normally see, I think, from a foreign perspective or foreign media perspective, his D-Day speech was very well received by both the foreign press and domestic press. But it was some of where he started tweeting or talking about domestic policy, where we did see some of that
positive message.
Exactly.
I see what you're saying.
Exactly.
Now, can I ask you this? Now, obviously, Maggie Thatcher was no stranger to protest. protested all in her own country. I can remember covering Ronald Reagan when he first visited London, of course, and he got an earful, as he did in follow-up trips to Paris, what have you. So maybe they save this wrath for Republican presidents, I don't know, or conservative leaders. Again, I don't know. But it does seem to be out of sync. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that, there were a small number of protesters. Some of these protesters were actually violent, and there were some assaults of pro-Trump protesters as well. And I have to say that, every single Republican president is faced with protests. But I think the vast majority of the British people were happy to see a US president who is very pro-British, who is a big supporter of the special relationship. Also, President Trump is a huge backer of Brexit, and Brexit is the official policy of the British government, is backed by a majority of the British people who voted for Brexit. And so his support for Brexit, I think, is highly welcome here in Great Britain. It's great to see the leader of the free world supporting the right of self-determination of the British people. That's a wonderful thing.
All right. Theresa May, by the way, stepping down formally today, although she gets to hang out at 10 Downing Street until the successor